I am thrilled to introduce you today to one of the highest energy digital marketing guys I've come across for a long while, Josh Boren of RCLCO, who recently won prestigious recognition as one of the country's top real estate marketing influencers by GlobeSt. Adam Gower here, and welcome to the real estate crowdfunding show syndication in the digital age at gowercrowd.com. Josh is a powerhouse of digital marketing insights and knowledge, as you'll hear today. You're going to learn how many touch points prospects have before they might actually contact you, right, directly, how to use data to track investor journeys through your website, social media, and newsletters, what are the most effective techniques for lead generation, and a whole lot more. You know, becoming recognized as an influencer in commercial real estate industry is entirely within your reach as well. You are going to hear lots of ideas today for how to do that, and for a detailed summary of exactly what it takes to create a structured system that brings all these tips and techniques into one holistic program. Visit the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com and sign up for the whiteboard workshop that I have there that will guide you through the entire process. Right? That's on the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com. Now, be sure to listen all the way through to the very end of today's podcast, because in our after podcast chat, Josh shared with me how he sold a football stadium on Twitter. Seriously, you're going to be hearing from a true digital marketing master, and he shares one of the greatest tricks for getting to the right person at exactly the moment you most need to. It's a technique that I've been using for years, and it works a charm. Only Josh did it on Twitter, which is another twist. You can hear exactly what he did right at the end of today's show after my sign off. All right, that's it. Fellow GlobeSt commercial real estate marketing influencer award winner, Josh Boren of RCLCO, coming up right now. Josh, what a pleasure. Finally. We actually managed to connect. I don't know when we started trying to connect. It was ages ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, and thank you for reaching out. And then, obviously the flexibility in calendaring, but we're here now, and that's the good news.
My great pleasure. I'm delighted to have you on the show. You are one of the awardees, if that's the right word, award winners from GlobeSt as one of the most influential marketers in the commercial real estate industry in America. Congratulations for that accolade. And it is exactly about that I'd like to talk to you. So I'm going to start off by quoting what they said you did, and then ask you what exactly did it entail, and then we'll get into the DNA. So this is what they said, why you got the award. That you and your team completely overhauled and revitalized RCL. So how do I pronounce that actually? RCLCO or RCLCO?
You got it on the first try. That's rare, but RCLCO, formerly Robert Charles Lesser and Company, and the acronym came the way we went going forward, obviously.
Okay, so here it goes. Completely overhauling and revitalizing RCLCO's real estate advisors' brand exposure and client engagement efforts. So tell me all, what did that involve?
Sure. And first, thank you for the kind words. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the award wasn't just to myself, but rather to the team, as you mentioned, right? And I do think it takes a village and it takes a team behind me in particular to really make things excellent. I have a great partner with my director of marketing in particular. We've got a couple other folks, and we've really built that platform up, and we can talk a little bit about that. But that sort of segues directly into your conversation. I've been with RCLCO now, this is actually my second stint with them, for about 4 years. And when we joined, myself and the marketing team, let's call it, the first of the two of us, joined about 4 years ago, we were at the crux of what was the 49th anniversary of the firm, so about to be 50 years in business. And the firm has been incredibly successful based on word of mouth and a lot of referral-based business, which we think speaks volumes about what we do. But we didn't necessarily have a focus or a particular expertise in marketing, business development, some of that outbound exposure. And in fact, I recall when I started to begin with, I had the choice between bringing on an executive assistant who an office admin who could support me with things like expense reports and calendaring, or focus on finding somebody who actually could execute marketing on a day-to-day business. So we brought the marketing people in first and worried about, taking on our own efforts as needed. And then, really went about kind of transforming the way the firm was viewed from an external perspective. And then ultimately, how can we, turn that into lead generation, and also what the consultants here at the firm want, which is essentially thought leadership and exposure and good work, right? And I think that's important to realize. When we came on board about 4 years ago, the very first thing we did was say, wow, our website's not even mobile capable. And that's, it seems like such a minor thing at the scheme of things, but at the end of the day, you couldn't even pick up an iPhone or a Samsung and understand what was happening in our business. So little things, and that's really where we started. We kind of started taking on little tasks one at a time, and ultimately tried to build out what is now a full team that focuses on kind of a more automated and sort of thought through process around lead generation, database building, exposure, promotion, et cetera.
All right, good. So now let me jump in and pick up on a couple of those phrases.
Great.
Lead generation. So tell me, let me actually ask a straight question. So you've been now at it for 4 years. What has been the most successful, effective method for lead generation? Think about the whole gamut, right? From your website all the way through to social media to email marketing. Just like, what has been the most effective method?
It's funny. These things all kind of work together, right? And for part of our business, we're a service-oriented business. We provide real estate consulting services. We don't invest our own capital. We are a third-party, objective perspective to developers, sponsors, other commercial real estate industry professionals that seek outside guidance. And so for us, it's about getting in front of the right people and also making sure that we're there when they need us. And I think that timing piece is really critical. We're not selling widgets where I know, it's been 90 days and they're down to their last one and I should give them a call. So it's about general exposure and multiple touch points. I like to say on the sales and business development side, you typically need about 6 to 10 touch points before you really bring in that business with somebody. And those touch points can be as simple as ensuring somebody's getting a newsletter from you, or ensuring that the presentations that your consultants recently took on at a conference are mass blasted or shared with them. And so a lot of these things play in together. One big thing we did was significantly grow our database in terms of the folks that we made sure were actually engaging with us, and then getting our marketing outbound material. That was a big piece, such as actually onboarding Salesforce or a CRM platform. We can come back to that in a little bit. But with those sort of tools, I think the one thing we found most interesting or unique is we provide a lot of thought leadership in terms of real estate presentations. And we recently, upon revamping the website, making it more accessible, we recently added sort of a data capture to understand or gather information on who was actually downloading these specific reports. And that's been really unique from a lead generation perspective, because somebody's taking time not just to spend on our website or through our social channels, but then go and search for something in particular that's of interest to them, and then are willing to put in their name, their email, their company and title, or whatever it may be, to actually then download that report. That's been unique, and we've been able to then follow up very specifically with those individuals, understanding what their interests are, as opposed to it being a bit more cold. So that's one example of where we've seen some real success.
Josh, I'll tell you what, you have a sophisticated approach. I'm so glad that you brought up all these topics. Now, actually, I'll let you into a secret. So I've actually done about 4 or 5 podcasts that are off topic. Like recently, okay. I've just recorded 4 or 5 because I keep getting questions from people about what's cannabis.
You can learn from anybody, right?
Where's the intersection with cannabis and real estate? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I did a podcast, crypto and this stuff. So I'm so happy to be back on the subject that I love so much. It's like being in Aladdin's cave talking to you of ideas.
You're hearing the key terms that you want again, right?
I'm back where I feel the happiest and most comfortable. Yes. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
I want to dive down. These are things that we deal with as well on a daily basis. There's a couple of things that I want to ask you. First of all, you talked about Touchpoints. So let's talk about that. But then also let's talk about data analytics, because we've actually just introduced for us anyway, it's a proprietary new system for tracking users. So we'll talk about that in a second, see if it's something you've seen somewhere else. But let's talk about Touchpoints, because this is very important. So what we do is create a massive volume of content that we roll out on all social media channels plus emails for anybody that signs up. When you and I've heard this term, like 6 to 10 touch points before something happens. I'm not really sure what that is. And you're right. You're selling data. We're raising capital. So we're both right. We're not. Neither of us are selling widgets. It's a long sales process. But what are those 6 to 10? Tell me, what are those 6 to 10 touch points? What actually are they? And what is how do they figure into the, I use the term investor journey, but the customer journey to getting to know you?
Yeah, I think regardless throughout and however those touch points kind of begin, you're ultimately trying to tell a story or craft a narrative around who you are as an organization, and maybe even more importantly, around who the personalities are within your organization. I think people are sort of the lifeline to these firms being great. I mean, part of the reason RCLCO is such a historic and sort of legacy type firm that has a great reputation is we've been around, yes, 50 plus years, but a lot of our senior leadership has been around for a significant amount of that time. And their opinions are valued. And that's also why a group like ourselves is so interesting, is the next generation of potential clients come in and their habits are slightly different. Those 6 to 10 touch points might look different as well. So I still think at the end of the day, in digital marketing and marketing in general is a huge piece of this, but nothing replaces the face-to-face conversation. And ultimately, whether it's via Zoom info or Zoom meeting, I should say, or whatever that may be, Zoom info, another tool that we use as an example, we can talk later. But that is a face-to-face or a touch point interaction now. A lot of those first impressions, I'll say, happen online now. And as much as you'd love for them to be in person all the time, you have to recognize that your brand and these people have an online persona and reputation as well. And I know you've shared some things earlier about what I should think about, and that's one thing I think you can always take away is whatever lives online is going to be there forever, and you have to keep that in mind. So for us, it's about crafting that story across those 6 to 10 touch points, and we do in a way that is both sort of mass focused because we only have so much bandwidth. So that could be our general newsletter. It could be one of those 6 touch points a year, let's say. Here's what we've been working on. Here's something you might find interesting. Let us know if this sounds relevant and we can follow up. But it also can be far more customized. So we may have within, our larger database, and we do, a number of highly segmented and targeted database lists that then are provided specific sort of thought leadership or interesting research that we think would be most applicable to them. And that's sort of crafting that story that's a bit more unique to them directly. So the sports team owner who's building a new arena but is hoping to put a large mixed-use development adjacent to that is going to get a potentially different marketing strategy in terms of the content than maybe the master plan developer who's seeking to build 15,000 houses on a couple thousand acres in the desert going forward. And our approach is going to be, first, we want to make sure you see what we can do in terms of our thought leadership. And so that exposure, things like webinars in particular, have been another interesting tool for us where not just an article, but folks can hear us talk about it and get deep into discussion. But really what we want to be able to do is customize our approach, our response, and our outreach to whatever it may be that's most interesting to that specific client. And I think that's something that maybe we do a little bit differently. In particular, I've always focused on more on the sales side maybe than marketing, but I think it's about listening more so than talking initially. And that first meeting or that first opportunity I have with somebody, I want to hear everything that's kind of their pain points or important to them or the things keeping them up at night. And then I'll come back with unique marketing collateral, a unique approach, a unique pitch, and how that all forms together from a strategy within our group that actually fits what they need. I mean, our firm offers so many services. If I tried to go in and, mass sell everything to everybody, I'd drown them in confusion. And so it's really about first listening and then setting up those 6 to 10 kind of follow-up points, a mix of both in person, hopefully, phone, and then specifically heavily on digital marketing to kind of keep that relationship alive and keep yourself top of mind for when the time is ready.
Yeah, very interesting. Just so that I understand exactly what your process is.
Yeah.
So you have obviously this huge range of paid content, right? Product that clients pay for. And so when you meet a prospect, somebody who's looking for data, for knowledge, you assess what they are looking for exactly, and then you personally, manually, identify what type of content they should be getting later. Is that you kind of pull it out of a menu and piece it together?
In theory, yeah. I mean, we'll use programs like a Constant Contact that can sync with our CRM platform in Salesforce and identify kind of customized leads and targeted campaigns, let's call it. They may not be all specific to one individual, so they may be bucketed by typology,
Segmented.
Right?
Okay. Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, and so and part of that is bandwidth, right? Obviously, we want to make sure we're giving people the right attention, but obviously, if we were talking to every single person individually, you know, the opportunity cost would be too great that we'd be missing whole categories. So we really are land use or typology driven, to your point, exactly.
Got it.
Segmented.
Okay, perfect. So so I understand that exactly. So now you have your business is the business of producing content. But for the most part, you sell your content, right? I mean, you're selling data and intelligence. So what does your digital marketing content production system look like?
Well, it's, you know, it's interesting. The production side of things has shifted recently in the last few years in particular, as both more tools have come online and as we as a firm have explored more tools. We have our own in-house business intelligence team as well that's working through a number of kind of database-driven and production-related systems that could provide those results and a lot of our output and more unique and user-friendly content. We've actually started to do a little bit of that with some of our free online marketing content as well. So historically, most of our analyses, and still to this day, tend to be report-based or report-driven in terms of the deliverable. But increasingly, what we're seeing is dashboard-type requests or interactive online web-based type platforms that allow folks to both interact with data and kind of gather more information at a granular level while still being able to visualize differently. And so, you know, those can be very unique, discrete questions that we're answering for clients, but there's a few examples on our website. If you go to sort of the publications tab there, whether it was an opportunity zone, deep dive in which we actually then produce interactive maps that allowed you to then click on individual census tracts and gather appropriate data by that specific opportunity zone, but again, could zoom out at a national level and start playing around with different locales or locations. Same with other, I think, integration with other types of our reports that we've been producing for free. But the idea is to try to get people, and what we're seeing, because I know you track a lot of this information, is that gets people to spend more time on our site as well. And the more time they're spending on our site, which is obviously one of those metrics that marketers look at in terms of impressions, folks coming in, whatnot, we've seen a large uptick in the amount of time folks are spending on our materials and our deliverables. And we think part of that is that we've shifted a lot to trying to be more, you know, still very academic, but much more visual and user-friendly in terms of how it's presented. Even simply the illustrations, we're doing a lot more infographics nowadays as well that can be disseminated via social media that really kind of pick up kind of key points that you can see on LinkedIn or Twitter very quickly, and maybe don't provide the deep dive around some of our analyses as well.
Okay, so just to be clear that I'm understanding what you're saying, because I was asking one thing and I thought you were telling me about something else. So let me try and connect the dots here.
Sure.
So what you just described are interactive tools like a clickable opportunity zone map that is available without charge. It's something that drives people to the site and keeps them there because there's actual value that you're providing. Is that correct?
Yep.
Because what I was actually getting
and it could be and that could be as simple as using a Tableau, for instance, is a program that we're using more frequently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's an illustration and kind of visualization tool for data, and it's very easily integrated into websites. Again, part of what we did was, you know, update the website from a marketing perspective, make sure we're kind of, you know, in the right year and can now integrate some of these tools. But Tableau, as an example, has been one where, it's an interactive tool from a production perspective that's allowed folks to really dig in further into some of the details and the analyses and the reports that we'd be providing, and ultimately then find more information about us because they've now spent more time on the site and they find themselves kind of off on the journey then learning who we are.
Fantastic. Totally get it. All right. That's exactly what I was asking.
Yeah.
Now, how do you pass that stuff and then distribute it on social media? What's your lead gen machine look like?
Yeah, it's a lot of still personal relationship driven support, partly because of the type of business we're in, where a lot of it is relationship driven with our senior leadership, management, managing directors who have been here for a long time. We're doing a lot of support again with some of the sales force, with some of our, social, a little bit less maybe, but in terms of supporting them that way, yes. Trying to make sure that when, in particular, our e-blasts or our newsletters go out, or new reports, or a lot of that kind of free content, and then is disseminated accordingly, they're also being followed up with kind of personalized emails from the folks that they have relationships with, right? So it's one thing, I think, for them to see, RCLCO advisories are kind of, general reporting and marketing, email go out and hit our large database. It's another thing to then get a follow-up a week later from a managing director saying, hey, this was an article that was relevant to what you were doing. Want to make sure you saw it. It's also important we make sure, and we've started to put protocols and processes in place to teach, especially some of the, let's call it the generation prior who are less familiar with social or had less value in it, to say, hey guys, the general firm account has now sent out this article. We want to make sure you on a personal level go out, please add some commentary, retweet it, post it on your own LinkedIn as well. So it's still a bit of a manual and automated process. From the marketing specific accounts, a lot more automation, but we still feel like in our business, which is very much client focused, client services, there should be a touch point where they're hearing from somebody individually, sending them or sharing that content as well.
Look, that's exactly the same as my business. We're raising tens of millions of dollars. Right? Our clients are raising tens of millions of dollars. It's not going to happen like selling a widget, right? It doesn't start on social and end up with a point of sale at the end and there's no touch. There's always going to be a
correct.
But the one thing that you mentioned was that, or the assumption that was inherent in your answer, was that you already have the name and email address. So
I see what you're saying. Lead gen.
What are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing to generate more of that? How do you do that?
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's actually been one of our biggest successes in the last 4 years since we've, kind of revitalized the marketing department. We've grown our kind of lead gen and database by at least 3x, if not more, which was a no small number to begin with. So the delta is pretty significant. And that comes from a variety of sources. We're still, I think, kind of in a beta mode in terms of being young, in terms of seeing where the most success is. So for instance, one thing I mentioned already, data capture on presentation, pushes, for instance, right? So we just had 2 folks who gave presentations at the International Builders Show. That was shared both amongst the press and sort of through IBS as well as through our own database. And we saw a number of inbound requests to the website from folks that we didn't know, who we now have captured that information. That's a small, kind of more discrete example.
And now is that a lead gen page? So if you want to see the presentation, give me your name and email address? Okay.
Exactly. We're capturing the data for you to get access to the reports. Okay. Exactly. Purely for lead gen. We also attend, and again, thought leadership being a big piece of what we do, we attend a number of conferences throughout the year. We sponsor as part of our larger kind of marketing campaign, both there's a digital component often and a non-digital component. Typically within those, and obviously they're very targeted conferences within the real estate industry, normally we are provided an attendee list or some sort of database of folks who are going to be there as well. And I mentioned a tool earlier kind of on accident, it's slip of the tongue, but Zoom Info is another example of something that we use, which is essentially a white pages for the internet. So we'll have our team in the marketing group, collect these lists, to your point, lead gen throughout the year. Let's say it's a conference, we went to a single family rental conference in Arizona, and there's 1,200 attendees, and as a sponsor, we have access to that list. And we'll then append the data as necessary to gather information and outreach to see if they'd be interested in learning more. And so there's a touch point, there's that lead gen piece, right? So we do a lot of that. We put on a lot of our own private events as well that are that are marketed but are sort of invite only by request, and again gather names that way. And also we've started to play more and more with what I think would be more traditional digital marketing around ad roll, AdWords, retargeting, things like that. And that, you know, again, our services are kind of varied. And so with that, we've been a bit more targeted around the right terms that, one, are affordable, and that, two, we think would actually drive the qualified leads to us that we're looking for.
Do you guys do any SEO?
We do some SEO as well. We engage third party for that, though. We haven't done it in-house. And it's really around certain terms, very similar to that kind of the digital targeting around AdWords or ad roll, whatever it may be, around, or I guess one and not the other, but in terms of understanding specific terminology. So real estate consulting, which is ultimately what we do, we look at SEO at some level, but those are very expensive terms, right? So it's a little bit about balancing budget as well, whereas real estate management consulting or real estate strategic planning, which is one of our very kind of defined services, is a place we'd rather spend those dollars, because looking at the metrics the last couple of years, we've seen better return on more granular type of terminology as opposed to kind of generic real estate, jargon.
Yeah, so you made me think of something, something I saw recently. It's quite funny, actually, but I saw an ad for SEO. It promised that we'll get you to Google #1 on YouTube and whatever, only $29. So I thought, we spend tens of thousands of dollars on SEO. Yep. So I sent it to one of my guys and he said, yeah, they'll get you to #1 as long as the search term is real estate consultant at the corner of Wilshire and
exactly. Well, and it's funny. I mean, we're in real estate, but that's also real estate on that page, which is ultimately what SEO is selling, right? So it's just
it has one search a year. Yeah, for this.
Exactly. So do you want to pay those, high street lease rates for that, right? So exactly. So we are very, I wouldn't say we're cautious, but we're careful and we're learning. Again, this is only kind of 4 years in, especially on the digital side of things, and ultimately being more of a B2B type play for our business versus a direct to consumer. We want to make sure we're smart about who we're targeting and how we're doing it. So we've slowly dipped our toes into things like SEO and, word or terminology targeting and retargeting and things like that. And we've seen some success with certain things, and that's a good learning experience, things we haven't. I mean, we have a whole group that focuses on providing litigation support, so expert witness and real estate valuation and consulting services for litigation cases. And we tried to figure out if there's certain terms there to help us get better in front of lawyers. And ultimately there was a month there where instead I was getting phone calls from everyone who lived in, some small town or some small little house, or you just had something wrong, and needed a lawyer to get them out of this or help them figure out how to get their landlord who wasn't, collecting the rent. And that's not what we do. And so obviously we were off on that one, right? And so we tweaked and we went back and said that wasn't the right terminology. It wasn't driving us to the groups we ultimately wanted to get in front of. And so that lead generation piece is not just, I think, lead gen, but then it's cleanup also. So those folks are getting entered into our database, but they're ultimately not qualified clients or not qualified leads. And so there's sort of an ongoing process, and that's really one of, our department now, this business development and marketing department's really up to 5 now, and everybody kind of has a different focus, but one role is really heavily focused on CRM management, database management, and kind of the tools around, ensuring our digital outreach is both accurate and up to date. And honestly, that's no small feat. I think the data collection and the data cleanup is probably one of the toughest things we struggle with or continue to have to deal with.
So Josh, tell me, you talked about looking at data and, you talked about opens and clicks, I presume, right? So did they open and look at or download a report? Yep. So what other kinds of data are you looking at?
Well, our firm in general is obviously a data-driven organization. We use a number of different sources in terms of the work we actually produce, and then put a level of analysis on top of that. So we like to think that we've sort of seen best practices, or we have a lot of lessons learned from real estate providers that are providing data or other analytics groups or things like that. And we can kind of harness that in-house to improve our business.
What I mean
you're
is,
saying how does that translate in-house, right?
No, what I mean is, so you've got a list now of however many thousands of users, and you're sending emails out, and you're getting inbound from LinkedIn and from wherever, all these different sources. And how are you measuring prospect activity and creating hot lists, if you want, of people that you should really be following up with?
Right. I'm sorry. That was kind of a long tangential way to get there, but a lot of, because we're data folks to begin with, we have smart consultants in-house, not just in the marketing department, but as actual data analytic consultants that know how to think about these things or recognize how to see trends or maybe things that we aren't recognizing. So we actually work very closely with our business intelligence team. We have a BI team in-house that they kind of full-time manipulate and kind of track our data around that Salesforce information, that inbound lead gen information. They're constantly kind of sharing updates to us around who's spending more time, who are the people that are actually opening our emails, who seem to be the individuals that may be interested in further investment on our end in terms of follow-up.
And what are the criteria that they apply to determining who is a good target this week that's displayed a lot of interest? What are they? What data points are they looking at for that?
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily pure data points on our end other than, obviously staying subscribed for a certain number of time, for instance, not unsubscribing to emails, following up or inquiring directly with certain things that may have, turned into or piqued their interest, for instance. For us, a lot of it is volume-based as well. I mean, there's this kind of constant need to make sure that we're growing that database of who is reviewing and reading our materials. And ultimately, and maybe we're not sophisticated enough yet to understand how to highlight the top 1%, but what we can certainly do is we can bucket who are the warm, hot, and kind of cold prospects. I don't know if we can necessarily say exactly what those metrics are, and a lot of times they're changing and they're unique to our different groups, and they're also unique to different products we're selling. One topic or thing that I think kind of resonates with this though right now that we're going through is, as part of kind of our strategy plan for the next 5 years, we're trying to figure out how to better serve our existing clients and then that are already in that kind of, and I say clients, I should say our existing clients and our existing contacts, folks that we've talked to but maybe haven't worked with yet, how to work with them kind of across the multiple groups and services we offer. And so we're now leveraging different databases to finally see who's on both of these lists that maybe previously was being communicated with on one topic, but not necessarily another. And how can we start being more strategic around leveraging our in-house data and our analytics to see where there's cross-pollination essentially between groups. And then also, how do you drive that further? Because a lot of what we do is geographic in nature. And so if we find there's a large multifamily developer that we're working with consistently on the West Coast, but we have a presence or at least exposure to on the East Coast, and the data is telling us that, that's triggering now an outreach. It's a personal component, but that's triggering outreach to me to say, Josh, you need to go do something about this and leverage your West Coast connections with this group to say, why aren't we doing the same thing with you guys across the country or on the East Coast?
Interesting.
So it's a kind of a combination. The data is certainly highlighting the kind of hot, warm, and cold targets for us, and those are in flux constantly depending on who's reading what and how quickly some of our IP is coming out and the responses we're getting. But it still, at the end of the day, requires a personal touch point for me to then send that note, send that email, do that outreach, and build a rapport ultimately. I think at the end of the day, all of the digital marketing we're trying to do is about creating a presence and a brand for RCLCO and for myself and our team.
Right, so that when somebody actually does contact you or connect with you, they've actually learned a lot about you before they even talk to you, right? They're much further advanced in the sales cycle. That's exactly what we find. And the reason actually I was asking you about the data, and we'll move on to two kind of bigger subjects. I've got about 3 pages of questions for you, but there's no way we can go through them all. It's too interesting. But there's a couple big
We'll have to do podcast part 2 eventually,
3.
right?
Exactly, after having waited so long. But there are a couple of kind of bigger subjects that tie into us directly. We'll go to, and then we'll go to some final sign-off questions. But the reason I was asking you about data was because just because we, like I said, we built this system that we are able to actually track user activity on our website.
Yeah.
So we're able to go from the click and open and click, which is definitely useful. But when you've got huge databases, those are still big numbers, right, of open and clicks. But to be able to see who are the top 10 people this week that have been actually active, spent the most time, what pages have they been on, et cetera, is, we've just developed it, we just launched it, and so
Wow.
we're testing it. But I can tell you from my own experience that the people that are in those categories are the buyers, period.
And I'd love to give you that opportunity when it's ready for you guys to pitch us. Those are one of those things that as part of our group, we're constantly evaluating sort of the marketing automation platforms and what may or may not be possible, and what's useful and which ones, both from a resource perspective, both economically and in terms of bandwidth, make the most sense for us and that we can use. So, I've certainly seen similar tools that allow you to collect that data, to follow that journey through the website. We're obviously using some of that right now where we're collecting how long people are on for. We're seeing which elements of our page are kind of moving to the top. So we've recently decoded that our presentations tend to be a top performer, and we think it's heavily based on that knowledge that folks are getting and kind of, again, that sort of, inside perspective that we would normally be charging folks for versus maybe even our more general kind of about us pages or things like that move on more quickly, right? So then how do you then, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, my wife, every time I interrupt a guest, I get grief later.
That's part of the conversation. We can talk over each other. I also never shut up, so you can just tell me to stop at some point. True sales guy, right?
Something different, because this is something that I continue to struggle with a little bit and have become, all modesty aside, extremely expert at getting out of my clients, my private clients. But I still struggle to do for myself. And that is something that you talked about right at the beginning of our conversation. That was two terms. One, you used the term story. It's all about telling stories, but linking it with the story of the personalities. So you've got people inside your firm who are, still only very fresh. They've only been in it for 50 years or so, unlike me, who's been in it for several hundred years. So how do you encourage those newcomers with only 40, 50 years in the business to become comfortable expressing their personality online so that they can establish a relationship before somebody ever even meets them?
Absolutely. And it's so funny you brought that up because you mentioned it a few minutes ago and I wanted to come back to that. And I guess it tied back into the original conversation. But a lot of times you can use that digital presence to sort of create that familiarity before you even meet somebody. I am very active on Twitter in particular. I read it way too many times a day. I'm probably addicted, but I gather information. More interestingly, not only disseminate our information, I also use it as a connection tool. And so there's a handful in particular of commercial real estate professionals that I find to be very informative that I'll engage with. And I've never met any of these individuals, and they're from all over the country. And yet I already feel like I know them. And I would bet that they would come back and tell me the same thing. And I found that very early on in my career. I would, before this role, I was doing business development for an architectural firm in a very specialized niche. And I would go to conferences, and this is kind of early in the days of Twitter, maybe 2010 when it was sort of first rolling out. And I had established myself at that time as sort of a go-to connection or news source within that sector for somebody who could kind of connect the dots and provide information. And I would walk into conferences and I'd go to get my name badge and somebody would be like, "You're at Joshua A. Boren." And I'm like, and they'd give me their Twitter handle. And I'd say, "Oh my God, I mean, your avatar is not your avatar. You have a little, cartoon normally, but like we know each other and we've been talking for years now." And there's that sort of sense of connection. So for me, it's a little bit easier as somebody who's on the front line doing business development and marketing to kind of focus my time there. It is tricky. And I don't think there's less buy-in from some of those, you call them newbies, I'll call them our more senior folks. They certainly want to do it. And some of them, to be honest, are very active. We have one or two guys that are the best at our firm, in particular at LinkedIn. And I think part of it is platform driven as well, right? They're also maybe a little bit more engaged on Facebook, whereas I would say our newer staff hires tend to be more engaged on Twitter and LinkedIn for work, or Instagram and LinkedIn for work, right? So there's that kind of segmentation as well. And we're starting to better, now that we have more bandwidth, we're starting to better define different strategies through those different mediums as well. So Twitter might look different than what LinkedIn looks like. And a lot of it, what we've been discussing, is about building and exposing those personalities to folks, right? So in Twitter, where maybe we can start getting senior leadership to add 1 or 2 comments to an article or something they see, which gives insight into their, knowledge. LinkedIn might be a place where they can really open up and provide more deep, in-depth analysis around how they're thinking and, maybe some insight. And by the way, I was just in Costa Rica on a personal trip, and we went to this resort, and the residential was selling for X, right? Whatever that may be. So there's not that there's a lack of buy-in. Honestly, our biggest struggle right now, which is a good thing, is too much work. So, the cycle's still booming, things are still going well. And so to carve out that time from senior leadership to say, hey, start thinking about the pipeline and building this up going forward, because at some point we want to make sure we're counter-cyclical to whatever's happening or what does happen when the market shifts. It's sort of that ebb and flow of, well, we're really busy right now also. So we're now putting those protocols in place to get ahead of things a little bit. And I think that there's an appreciation around that. But I think also, as either we bring more resources on, hire more folks, or if work slows down slightly, there's going to be a larger emphasis from our senior team and everybody on spending more time on social, encouraging more of that personality to come out. And a lot of what they do already is about doing that at conferences and events and things like that. I mentioned earlier, for us, lead generation and thought leadership are kind of the really important things. Sponsorship for us, having our name on something, doesn't really mean a lot. It's more about, to your point, that attendee list, that being able to get in front of a group and speak to them at a conference, leading a roundtable, leading a webinar. Those are the things where we feel like we can show our value as a firm and our staff sort of insights and knowledge, which is really where they're adding value. That opens things up for us. And so that's really where our emphasis has been and where we're continuing to drive. And I think it speaks to your point. It's about making sure that they can get their personalities out there through these mediums.
Yeah, and it's a long game. I mean, everything that you're talking about 4 years, we put systems together for clients in 3 months that get them from 0 to high speed. But you got to feed that with fuel. I think of it like an automobile, right? You've got your website is the body. The engine is the systems. There's your auto email systems, your auto posting on social media, etc. But without content, without food, that's the engine. But without content, you don't have fuel. So you've got to be feeding this machine with fuel. And it's interesting that you mentioned the recession, because it takes time to get these things going and to start to establishing a relationship. Actually, now is an extremely good time to be developing a digital presence, because during a recession, that's when people are going to be looking for leaders and for answers to their solution, to their problems, right? Solutions during that time. And if you start then, it's too late. But if you've started now, laid the groundwork, you'll be in good shape. Josh, I want to finish up with 3 sign-off questions. But before I do, I've got one more question for you.
That's okay. We'll keep going, right?
What is your Twitter? Do you have a Twitter list? Have you got a list of all those people you talk? Can I subscribe to your list?
I will make sure I get you numerous sort of marketing outputs and both our LinkedIn kind of followers, our Twitter names, everybody for you. So those are probably the 2 we're most.
You mentioned that you had a lot of content.
Who I follow. Yeah, that's sort of been built up over time, to be honest. I'm not as, it's funny, I'm very OCD, so you'd think I'd be more organized than I am. But because of kind of the generic growth over the last, like I said, it's been 10 years. I just got my 10-year anniversary on Twitter, little notification. And it's not a lot of folks, but I actually started building that out before lists even existed. So I probably should go back at some point and clean those up. But I can certainly send over some of my, kind of best in class folks that I find interesting.
Why don't you do that? I'll put it in the show notes if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I'll send some things over.
Yeah.
Of course. And obviously I'm going to plug our own group, our RCLCO accounts across the board, just from a data research and sort of an analysis perspective on what's happening across the industry, as well as on certain niche topics. obviously a great
Absolutely.
great resource.
And I'll keep everything on that. I'll put everything on the
I
thing.
know.
So let me ask you
All
three
right.
final sign-off questions. These are
Yes.
questions I ask of all my guests. Eventually, I'll probably package this into some kind of lead gen book, just so you know. And then I create all these videos. So here we go. Three sign-off
Great.
questions. My business, as you know, is raising capital for
Yes.
real estate sponsors, right? Online.
Yep.
So
Yep.
what would you say is the most important thing somebody starting out syndicating their deals online should keep in mind?
Engage RCLCO for a third-party market study. No, I kid. Honestly, though, I think it goes back to that first building a rapport and a level of trust. I don't think you want to come in and even that group I mentioned of these real estate kind of, folks on Twitter, if you just come in on day one and start saying, hey, I got deals, I'm doing syndication, hit me up, I want this, you're not going to get very far. You need to first build a rapport with folks and then not necessarily have a track record, because everybody has to start with their first deal, which I think you have to recognize. But there needs to be some sort of built out persona around, knowledge and understanding what you're doing, right? So whether that's making sure you're asking smart questions to these groups, publishing information online that you're finding around deals, explaining why, or even just engaging with folks via Twitter and explaining that. I think that building those relationships first and foremost, a level of trust certainly has to be found, I think, to do syndication deals that make sense. There's certainly a lot of tools out there right now that'll let you do crowdfunding, and you can probably pull in, small amounts from a number of people that you'll never meet. I would think you'd be better off building rapport, building trusting relationships, using digital marketing tools to do that, and then going out and syndicating. So maybe it's a slightly larger or longer process, but I think, at least in real estate, I think if you're here, you should be playing the long game.
Second question of three. You've been online for a long time. You're a seasoned expert. For as long as you've been at RCLCO, I've been doing digital marketing. I'm an old dog that learned new tricks. So for somebody that's been at a lot longer than I have, what's been the hardest lesson you've learned online?
Yeah, I think I briefly referred to it kind of jokingly before, but recognizing that everything online remains online and is going to be online. And there's kind of two parts to that. One being, obviously, 10 years ago, I wasn't in the same role I'm in today. And so maybe, and I've always been a very cautious and smart person around things, but you never know what you've said in the past that may offend somebody today. And I think that's that second part, which is no matter what you do, and as politically correct as you try to kind of play that middle line, ultimately you're going to offend somebody. And you have to, if you do so, take it with grace and kind of follow up in a way that isn't confrontational. I mean, we've certainly seen things, and even articles around real estate that we think could be very beneficial. You don't always see every perspective and everybody's lens that they view it through. And so you just have to recognize that, there are folks out there that the way what you said may not come across to them the same way. And that's going to live there forever if it's online. So I'll leave it at that. How's that?
Now I'm going to look you up and see what you're talking
right,
about.
Exactly. No.
Well, exactly. It's some of those university pictures that he was in. No, I'm just kidding, Josh. But it's interesting you say that. I actually have come to think of that as extremely reassuring. If you think, and I've said this before, probably on the podcast, so for everyone that's heard me say this before, forgive me, but you think about the normal curve, what you call the bell curve.
Yep.
Everyone down the middle is the average, the indifferent, right? Most people are gathered there. They're on the fence. They could take it or leave it. They're taking your stuff, but they're not, engaged.
Yeah.
People that are important to those that are on the peripheries, right? The buyer is the one that's on the right hand side of that curve.
Right.
So whenever I get a negative response or an FU email, which I occasionally get, right, on behalf of clients, I always think, good, I'm doing my job, because for that, every one of those, there's somebody else on the other side of that curve who is dying to invest. Right? We just
right. It means you're doing something right, and also that your outreach is now getting to a point where you're reaching people who care. And I think that's what matters, and that's what you're saying exactly.
Exactly, that's right.
You're finally you're cutting through the clutter. Regardless if they're on your side or not, you've cut through that clutter. And honestly, to your point, I mean, if there's somebody over here that's upset, there's going to be that buyer eventually, or that client eventually as well.
That loves it. Right. So last question, Josh, for today.
Sure.
Your personal key daily habits online that keep you successful online?
Yeah. For me, it is most heavily focused on Twitter, I'll be honest. And a lot of what I do, while it's kind of overseeing and driving marketing strategy and business development strategy for the firm at a higher level, where my team, great team, they're the ones that obviously were part of that award, execute, a lot of what I still need to be able to do is be informed and sound smart and get in front of the right people. And so for me, I've learned to use Twitter primarily as a data download and sort of I'm a sponge. I read all day. I want to learn everything. And so for me, I'm able to kind of regurgitate what I think is a wealth of knowledge back to the right folks. And so my daily habits include, as I mentioned before, way too many hours a day on Twitter, reading information. You should see how many tabs I have open by the end of the day in terms of articles that I'm going to get through. And part of that isn't just reading those things, but then engaging with those things, potentially engaging with the authors or the folks that are sharing with them and participating in conversation. So I try to make it a habit. I'm not always great about it, but I try to make it a habit to engage with somebody daily on some sort of platform, normally Twitter or LinkedIn. And then because I'm doing it constantly, I'm always just gathering information from what I think are the right sources. And that's to your point, who are you following on Twitter, on LinkedIn? Are you following both local, national news? Are you following individuals? But if you follow the right group of people and you're engaging with the right group of people, I think there's a constant learning and relationship building effort that can happen. And I've even gotten referrals, not necessarily, out of the groups of people that I'm talking to. So even if they're not a direct client, they may know somebody that ultimately needs our services. And I think that's been very, very valuable. At the same time, I need to figure out how to actually take a step back from the amount of Twitter I probably consume a day as well. So,
well, it sounds like you do it actually on your desktop. Do you actually engage with the?
I'm a little bit of both. Honestly, I'm primarily on the road these days. I take a number of meetings. I lead business development for the firm nationally, and so most of what I do actually day in and day out is mobile based. So I've gotten pretty good at working off the phone. And I was probably one of the last, for folks that know me, I was probably one of the last holdouts that had a BlackBerry. I kept it as long as I could before I was forced to move on. So.
I have some amazing video of me on BlackBerry. I used to have a BlackBerry, and gosh, this is so tangential to what we're talking about. I was just about to say thank you for being on the show, but I have to tell you this.
It's okay.
I used to be a line reserve with the LAPD, so 24/7
wow.
peace officer status. So I went through all the training. One of the things that they trained us on was the pit maneuver. And the pit maneuver is where you cause a car to spin out, right? So you can stop them. Well, it made the most unbelievable squealing sounds I've ever heard in my life. And I used the BlackBerry to record while I had my partner do it while I was driving, and then I recorded it while he was driving. And I can't get it off the bloody BlackBerry. I don't know how to do that now.
Yeah, you can never get rid of it because that's the only video you have, only place you can display the media.
I don't know. I can't get it. It's there, and the battery's dead, and there's like no way.
So funny.
How do I get it off? I'm gonna have to figure that out. Josh.
Yeah, it's funny. Every so often I see BlackBerry show up on eBay and they get these outrageous numbers because people still want them. It's pretty funny. So anyway, we totally digress now. This is a good example of true business development. We have passed the point of talking about business, and now we're just creating rapport and we have a relationship together, right? So there you go.
And it's all online, right? We're not even in the same. I have no idea even where you are geographically. Actually.
Los Angeles. So when you mention those pit maneuvers, I'm frequently a car chase watcher as they're on TV here all the time.
Straight past the house. Exactly right.
Exactly.
Josh, your last name's pronounced Boren, right? Boren?
Boren. Yep, exactly.
Josh Boren, RCLCO. Thank you so very, very much for being on my show. It's been an enormous pleasure.
Absolutely. It was great that we finally made it happen. And like you said, looking forward to part 2 and maybe 3.
Okay, I told you so. Josh Boren of RCLCO, fellow winner of recognition by GlobeSt as a commercial real estate marketing influencer. Remember, to find out exactly how to build the best holistic marketing systems in the industry to raise capital for your deals, watch me guide you through the entire system in the free whiteboard workshop on the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Josh Boren of RCLCO, the man who sold a football stadium on Twitter, coming up next, for your time with me today. That's all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.